I want you to picture the scene, because if this were a movie script, a studio executive would probably, send it back for being too cliche. It is November 14th, 1943. We are in New York City. We are at Carnegie Hall. It is the temple of American culture. And the atmosphere backstage is, well, it's frantic.
Frantic is putting it mildly. I mean,
Yeah.
It's a full-blown catastrophe backstage. You have the New York Philharmonic, arguably the toughest, most critical, most terrifying orchestra on the planet at that time, just waiting to go on.
And this isn't just any concert.
No. This is a Sunday afternoon, which means it is being broadcast live across the entire nation.
Yeah.
On CBS radio. So you have millions of people tuning in. And the conductor, the legendary Bruno Walter, he's in bed. He's got the flu. He literally can't move.
Okay, so usually in this situation, you have a plan B, right? You don't just leave the podium empty.
Well, you'd think so.
Yeah.
Normally, you'd call in another titan.
Yeah.
You'd get someone like Arturo Toscanini or Thomas Beecham, someone with gray hair and a ton of gravitas.
So the big gun.
The biggest. But on this specific day, the manager, a guy named Arthur Judson, he can't find anyone. The heavy hitters are all unavailable or they're out of town. So he has absolutely no choice. He has to turn to the assistant conductor.
And who is the assistant?
A 25-year-old kid named Leonard Bernstein. And when I say kid, I really mean it in the context of classical music. He'd been out partying the night before. He's probably nursing a bit of a hangover.
Oh, no.
And because this all happened so fast, he doesn't even own the proper clothes. Conductors for a Sunday matinee are supposed to wear these formal morning tails. Bernstein walks out wearing a gray business sack suit because it's the best he could pull together on short notice.
That is a nightmare scenario. I'm sweating just thinking about it. But surely as the assistant, he knew the music. He must have studied it.
You would think so. But here is the real kicker. He hadn't rehearsed. Not a single minute with the orchestra. And this specific program was incredibly difficult. You're talking Schumann, Miklos Rosa, Wagner, Richard Strauss. These are heavy, complex pieces.
So he's walking out onto that stage in front of the hardest critics in the world to conduct them. Cold.
Totally cold. It is a suicide mission.
Because if he fails here, if he messes up a tempo or misses a single cue on live national radio, his career is it's over before it even starts, right?
Oh, absolutely. He would be the laughingstock of the classical world for the rest of his life. He'd be finished. But he doesn't fail. He lifts the baton and something, magical happens. The energy he throws at that orchestra, the musicians later said they had never seen anything like it. It was just electric.
And the audience could feel that.
By the end of the concert, the audience isn't just clapping politely. They are screaming.
Yeah.
They are on their feet, stamping. A total triumph.
And the press went wild.
The next day, the New York Times didn't just put a review in the arts section. They put the story on the front page. The headline called it a good American success story. And you have to remember the context. This is 1943. The world is at war. America is hungry for a hero who isn't a soldier. And suddenly, here is this handsome, charismatic, American-born genius. It changed everything for him overnight.
So that is the Cinderella moment. That is the launch pad. And today we are going to dive into the life of the man who arguably became the personification of music itself for the 20th century. We've got a massive stack of notes here.
We do. And our mission today is to look past just the fame and, the tuxedo. We want to explore what Bernstein himself called the double man.
The double man. Okay, that sounds like a spy thriller or like a Jekyll and Hyde situation.
In a way, it was a bit Jekyll and Hyde. It was this profound internal conflict. Bernstein spent his entire life feeling torn between two identities, the conductor and the composer.
Two different jobs.
He felt like two different men locked up in the same body, just fighting for control. And layered on top of that, you have this other tension between his public life as a global superstar and family man and his much more complex private reality as a gay man.
There's so much to unpack there, but I want to go back to the beginning. I love that the Times called it an American success story because usually that implies, a log cabin or a farm. But Bernstein's origin story is, well, it's strictly retail.
It really is. So let's go to Lawrence, Massachusetts, 1918. He's born Louis Bernstein, though his family always called him Leonard, and he legally changed it when he was 16.
So he was always Lenny.
Always Lenny.
Yeah.
His parents, Jenny and Samuel, were Russian and Ukrainian Jewish immigrants. And his father, Samuel Bernstein, is a character we really need to understand to get the whole story. He was a businessman, but not just any businessman.
I was reading this in the notes and I actually laughed out loud. He made his fortune with the Samuel J. Bernstein Hair Company.
Specifically, he held the exclusive New England distribution rights for the Frederick's permanent wave machine.
The permanent waves machine. I can just picture this massive, terrifying contraption from the 1920s designed to curl hair. It looks like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It's totally iconic. But here's the irony that I just love. You have a father who made his fortune on a machine designed to make waves, hair waves, and his son becomes the master of sound waves.
That is beautiful. It's poetic. But I'm guessing Samuel didn't appreciate the poetry.
Not one bit. Samuel was a pragmatist, a total pragmatist. To him, a Jewish boy in America goes into business. Maybe law, maybe medicine, music. In the old country, music was what the klezmer players did.
It wasn't a respectable profession.
It meant you were basically a beggar. It meant traveling from town to town, relying on scraps. It was a path to poverty. So when young Leonard showed interest, Samuel actively tried to crush it. Leonard wanted piano lessons. Samuel said absolutely not, refused to pay a single dime.
That's a huge obstacle for a prodigy. I want to be a genius, Dad, but you won't pay the tuition.
But it didn't stop him. And this is where you really start to see Bernstein's personality emerge. He was an entrepreneur. When he was just a kid, he started giving piano lessons to the other neighborhood kids, probably for pennies, just to raise the cash to pay for his own training.
A pyramid scheme for piano lessons. I love it.
Essentially. And the spark for all of this was totally accidental. It wasn't some grand plan. When Leonard was 10, his Aunt Clara was moving and needed a place to store her upright piano. So she just dumped it at the Bernstein house. Leonard touched the keys, and that was it. The hair business never stood a chance after that.
And one of those neighborhood kids he taught was Sid Raman, right? I saw that name.
Yes, and you should keep that name in mind. Sid Raman was a childhood friend who took lessons from Lenny, and then decades later, he is the guy helping Bernstein orchestrate West Side Story. The roots go very, very deep.
Wow. So despite the hair machine money not flowing his way, he makes it to college. He goes to Harvard. And this is where we start to see that he's not just a performer, he's a serious intellectual.
Right. He wasn't just, practicing scales 8 hours a day. He wrote a thesis at Harvard with a very heavy title, The Absorption of Race Elements into American Music.
Which sounds incredibly dry, but what was he actually getting at with that?
He was analyzing how jazz and African-American rhythms were bleeding into the classical tradition. He was already obsessed with this melting pot of American sound. After Harvard, he goes to the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia. This is a huge pivot point.
Oh, so?
At Harvard, he learned to think. At Curtis, he learned to work. He studied conducting with a man named Fritz Reiner.
And Reiner was not a pat-you-on-the-back kind of teacher. He was famous for being a tyrant.
Oh, no. Reiner was a terrifying disciplinarian. He taught Bernstein that conducting isn't about waving your arms and being emotional. It's about precision, economy of motion. Every single gesture has to mean something.
The mechanics of it.
Exactly. But then Bernstein goes to Tanglewood, summer home of the Boston Symphony, and he meets Serge Koussevitzky.
The mentor. The real father figure.
The emotional father figure, absolutely. Koussevitzky was the polar opposite of Reiner. He was all about passion, spirit, and the sacred art of music. So you see Bernstein absorbing these two poles, the rigorous, cold discipline of Reiner and the overwhelming hot emotion of Koussevitzky. He fused them into his own style.
And somewhere in this mix, he meets Aaron Copland. And the story of how they met is just, it's so perfectly Lenny.
He was at a party in 1937. It was actually Copland's birthday. Bernstein, who's just a student at this point, sits down at the piano and plays Copland's piano variations.
And that's not an easy piece.
It is a brutally difficult, percussive, modern piece. Most people struggle to even listen to it, let alone play it. Bernstein plays it from memory with its ferocious intensity. And Copland was just standing there, jaw on the floor.
Imagine impressing your hero by playing their hardest song better than they can probably play it.
They became incredibly close after that. Copland really became the closest thing to a composition teacher Bernstein ever had. But before the feint hit, I have to throw in this one little detail because it speaks to his hustle. When he was living in New York, trying to pay rent, he worked for a music publisher transcribing pop songs and jazz.
Yeah, a side gig.
Yeah, and he published them under a pseudonym, Lenny Amber.
Which is a bilingual pun.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because Bernstein is the German word for amber. He was already playing with his identity even then.
So let's fast forward a bit. He has the Carnegie Hall debut. He's famous overnight. But this brings us to that central tension you mentioned at the start. The double man. Conductor versus composer. I think for us today, it's hard to understand why this was even a problem. Why couldn't he just be both?
To understand that, you have to understand the academic climate of the mid-20th century. This was the era of what they called high modernism. If you wanted to be respected by the serious critics and the universities, you didn't write pretty melodies. You basically wrote math. You wrote atonal music, the 12-tone row. Serialism. It was intellectual, jagged, dissonant, and very, very difficult. It was music for the brain, not for the heart. And if you wrote a tune that someone could hum on their way out of the theater, the academic elite looked down their noses at you.
They'd say you were pandering.
They'd call you a lightweight, a sellout.
So where did that leave Lenny? Because when I think Bernstein, I think West Side Story, I think these huge, lush, emotional melodies.
Exactly. And that just tore him apart. He desperately, desperately wanted to be the great American composer, the successor to Beethoven or Mahler.
Yeah.
But the music that naturally poured out of him was jazz and plop and Latin rhythms and Jewish liturgical scales.
Yeah.
He loved the Beatles as much as he loved Doc. And the critics punished him for it.
So he felt insecure about his own success. That seems crazy.
Incredibly, he genuinely felt that by writing Broadway musicals, he was wasting his gift, or that he was stopping himself from writing the great symphony he was supposed to write.
But thank goodness he did write the musicals. I mean, On the Town in 1944, and then West Side Story in 1957. These aren't just plays. They totally redefined what American theater could do.
On the Town is so significant, not just musically, but socially. Think about it. It's 1944. Segregation is the law of the land in many places. Bernstein and his collaborators cast a Japanese-American lead dancer, Sono Sato, while her father was literally interred in an actual camp.
Wow.
They had a multiracial cast, portraying mixed-race couples holding hands on stage. They had a black concert master in the orchestra pit. Bernstein wasn't just writing catchy songs. He was using the theater to say, this is what America should look like.
And then West Side Story. I feel like we take it for granted now because we all watched the movie in high school, but at the time, this must have been just shocking.
It was completely revolutionary. You're taking Shakespeare Romeo and Juliet and putting it in the slums of New York with gang warfare. The opening scene isn't some grand overture, it's silence and snapping fingers. The score is this incredibly sophisticated fusion. You have the cool jazz of the Jets, the violent Latin rhythms of the Sharks, and then these soaring, almost operatic symphonic melodies.
And technically, the music itself is really complex, right?
Oh, it's fiendishly difficult. The song Maria, for example, is built on a musical interval called a tritone, an augmented fourth. Historically, in music theory, that interval was called the diabolus in musica.
The devil in music.
The devil in music. It's unstable. It creates tension. And Bernstein built the most romantic, beautiful song in the whole show on the most unstable interval in music history. That is just, it's genius.
But even with all that genius, he's still worried it wasn't serious enough?
He did. He wrote 3 symphonies, Jeremiah, The Age of Anxiety, and Kaddish. They are beautiful, intense, powerful works, but they never achieved the universal love that West Side Story did, and that gnawed at him his whole life.
Let's talk about a piece that really shows this struggle. Mass. This was commissioned by Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis for the opening of the Kennedy Center in 1971.
Mass is the ultimate expression of Bernstein's double-man eclecticism. He called it a theater piece for singers, players, and dancers. And it has everything. It mixes rock bands, blues singers, Hebrew prayers, marching bands, and the traditional Latin liturgy. It's chaotic and beautiful and massive.
And it was politically radioactive at the time?
Well, completely. It was 1971. The Vietnam War is raging. Bernstein used the structure of the Catholic Mass to ask these huge questions about authority and war and peace. The FBI actually warned the White House that the piece contained coded anti-war sentiments and might embarrass the president.
So Nixon didn't go.
Nixon was advised not to attend the premiere, and he didn't. He stayed away.
And the church wasn't exactly thrilled either, I'm guessing.
It was very polarizing. Some Catholic officials called it blasphemous. But decades later, Pope John Paul II actually requested a performance at the Vatican. It just shows how ahead of his time he was. He was blurring the lines between the sacred and the profane, and that really confused people back then.
We can't talk about Bernstein the conductor without talking about Gustav Mahler. The notes say Bernstein is basically responsible for the modern Mahler revival. Why Mahler? Of all the composers, why did he latch onto him so intensely?
Because looking at Mahler was like looking in a mirror for him. Mahler was also a world-famous conductor who struggled to find time to compose. Mahler was a Jewish man in Vienna who felt like an eternal outsider. Bernstein felt that kinship deep in his bones. He once said he understood Mahler's problem of being 2 different men locked up in the same body.
So when Bernstein conducted Mahler, it wasn't just a performance, it was personal.
It was an exorcism. It was a confession. Before Bernstein, people thought Mahler's symphonies were too long, too emotional, too neurotic. Bernstein came along and said, no, this neuroticism, this chaos, this beauty, this is exactly what the 20th century feels like. He recorded the full cycle of Mahler's symphonies twice.
And famously, after President Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, he chose Mahler.
That was a defining moment. For the memorial concert, he chose to conduct Mahler's Resurrection Symphony. It was the perfect piece to channel the nation's grief.
That brings us to another huge part of his legacy. We've talked about the conductor and the composer, but what about the teacher? I feel like for a certain generation, maybe our parents' generation, Bernstein was classical music because of what he did on television.
He was the first great TV teacher. He realized early on that television wasn't just a box for entertainment. It was a classroom with millions of seats. He started the young people's concerts with the New York Philharmonic in 1958. These ran for 53 concerts over 14 years.
And the thing about those shows, I've watched a few of them on YouTube, is that he never talks down to the kids.
Never. That was his golden rule. He treated children as intelligent beings who just happened to be short. He would explain these incredibly complex concepts like sonata form, or musical modes, or orchestration, but he did it with such charisma and with these brilliant analogies. He made it cool.
And he did the omnibus lectures for adults, which were even more elaborate.
The omnibus scripts are just masterpieces of communication. He once had the entire score of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony painted on the studio floor, giant size. And he had musicians standing on the actual notes to explain the structure of the piece.
Wow.
He wanted to democratize music. He wanted to strip away the tuxedo-wearing elitism and show people the engine under the hood, you know.
And he carried that attitude into the concert hall, too. When he took over as music director of the New York Philharmonic, he started doing these Thursday evening preview concerts where he would actually grab a microphone and talk to the audience before the music.
Which was completely unheard of at the time. Conductors were supposed to be these silent mystics who turned their backs to the audience. Bernstein turned around and said, hey, let me tell you why this piece matters.
Speaking of talking to the audience, we have to discuss the Glenn Gould incident, April 6, 1962. This is like legendary in classical music circles.
It is one of the most famous and debated moments in concert history. Glenn Gould, the brilliant but very eccentric Canadian pianist, was the soloist for Brahms' Piano Concerto No. 1. And Gould had a very specific vision for the piece. He wanted to play it incredibly slowly, like much, much slower than standard.
And Bernstein thought that was a bad idea.
He hated it. He thought it dragged, that it destroyed the structure of the piece. But Gould insisted. So what does Bernstein do? He walks out on stage before the music starts, waits for the applause to die down, and he makes a speech. He tells the audience, don't be frightened, Mr. Gould is here.
Oh, that's amazing.
And then he explains that he profoundly disagrees with the tempo, but he finds Gould's ideas so valid and so serious that he decided to conduct it anyway.
That feels a little passive-aggressive, doesn't it? Like, I'm doing this, but just so you all know, it's not my fault if it sucks.
Laugh some. Well, that is certainly how Gould's fans took it. Bernstein always claimed he was trying to protect Gould, to warn the audience so they wouldn't boo. He posed the famous question. In a concerto, who's the boss? The soloist or the conductor? But it created this huge stir. It just showed Bernstein's willingness to break the fourth wall and bring the audience right into the artistic argument. He loved the drama of it all.
Now let's pivot to his activism. Because Lenny was not a quiet man when it came to politics, and that got him into some very serious trouble over the years.
He was a lifelong advocate. And we have to remember, being a vocal liberal in the 1940s and 50s during the McCarthy era meant you were being watched. His FBI file was over 800 pages long. They started monitoring him in the 40s because of his ties to various left-wing organizations.
And he was deeply involved in the civil rights movement, too.
Yes. He hired Sanford Allen, who was the first black musician for the New York Philharmonic. He marched in Selma in 1965 with Harry Belafonte. He was consistently on the side of the oppressed. But his activism also led to one of the most difficult, most humiliating moments of his public life.
Yeah.
The radical chic controversy.
This is the story involving the Black Panthers.
Correct. So let's set the scene because the optics were complicated, to say the least. It's 1970. Bernstein and his wife Felicia live in this gorgeous 13-room penthouse duplex on Park Avenue. And they decide to host a fundraiser for the Panther 21 members of the Black Panther Party who were in jail with ridiculously high bail.
So you have a complete collision of two worlds.
It was a visual train wreck. You have Black Panthers in their leather jackets and berets standing in a duplex on Park Avenue, eating, little hors d'oeuvres served by white maids in uniform. And sitting in the corner taking notes on all of this was the journalist Tom Wolfe.
And Tom Wolfe did not write a flattering piece about this party.
He wrote a legendary hit piece. It was published in New York Magazine under the title Radical Chic, that party at Lenny's. He absolutely flayed them. He painted Bernstein as this out-of-touch, wealthy, liberal, seeking thrills by hanging out with actual revolutionaries as if they were, like, party decorations.
That must have been a public relations nightmare.
It was a total disaster. The phrase radical chic stuck. It became this cultural shorthand for mocking celebrities involved in politics. The Bernsteins received hate mail. The Jewish Defense League picketed their building. It deeply, deeply damaged his reputation. But here is the twist that people didn't know until much, much later. The backlash wasn't entirely organic.
What do you mean by that?
The FBI was involved. We know now from declassified documents that J. Edgar Hoover's FBI wasn't just watching, they were actively fanning the flames. They saw this party as the perfect opportunity to neutralize Bernstein, who they considered a powerful anti-war voice.
So they were trying to discredit him.
They actually planted agents to fuel the protests outside his building. They even generated some of the hate mail he received.
Wait, the FBI was writing hate mail to a conductor?
It was part of COINTELPRO, their counterintelligence program. They wanted to discredit him and silence him. So Radical Chic wasn't just a tone-deaf party. It was a targeted government campaign to shut him up.
Wow, that puts a completely different spin on the whole thing. But even with all that pressure, he never stopped using his podium for political statements. I'm thinking of the Berlin Wall in 1989.
That was his victory lap. Christmas Day, 1989. The wall has just fallen. The Cold War is ending. Bernstein goes to Berlin to conduct Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and he assembles this incredible orchestra made up of musicians from East and West Germany, plus the four occupying powers, France, Britain, the U.S., and the Soviet Union.
And he changed the lyrics, right? Which you are famously not supposed to do with Beethoven.
It was an incredibly bold move. The famous Ode to Joy uses the German word Freude, which means joy. Bernstein changed it to Freiheit, which means freedom. He told the audience that he was sure Beethoven would have given his blessing. It was the perfect synthesis of his music and his profound belief in humanity.
And in his final years, he focused that energy on the AIDS crisis.
He was absolutely furious about the Reagan administration's inaction and silence. He raised millions for research, and he famously refused the National Medal of Arts from George H.W. Bush in 1989. He turned down a presidential medal as a protest because the administration had revoked an arts grant for an AIDS-related exhibit. He put his principles above his prestige right up to the very end.
This brings us to the personal side of things. We've mentioned his wife, Felicia Montealegre. They were married in 1951. They had 3 children, Jamie, Alexander, and Nina. And if you look at the photos, they look like the perfect, glamorous American family. But there was a very complex reality underneath all of that.
There was. Bernstein was gay, or to be more precise with modern terms, likely bisexual, but with a primary attraction to men. And Felicia, his wife, she knew this going into the marriage.
There's a letter she wrote him early in their marriage that was found years later. It's heartbreakingly honest.
It is a stunning document. She wrote to him, and I'm paraphrasing, "You are a homosexual and may never change. If your peace of mind depends on a certain sexual pattern, what can you do?" She proposed a marriage based on mutual love and companionship and family, while also acknowledging his nature. She essentially said, "I love you as you are. Let's find a way to make this work."
And for a long time, it seems like it did work.
It did. By all accounts, they loved each other very deeply. It wasn't a sham marriage in that sense, but the strain was always there. Bernstein had affairs with men. The tension between his public image as this devoted father and his private desires grew harder and harder to manage, especially as the gay rights movement gained visibility in the 70s.
And eventually they did separate. Right?
In 1976, Bernstein left Felicia to live with a man named Tom Cawthron. It seemed like he was finally going to, live his truth openly. But the great tragedy is that shortly after he left, Felicia was diagnosed with lung cancer.
That must have been just devastating for him.
Bernstein was completely crushed. He immediately moved back in. He canceled work. He cared for her until she died in 1978. And by all accounts, he never really recovered from her death. He carried a tremendous amount of guilt. He felt that he had contributed to her illness through the stress and heartbreak he caused her.
People say his conducting actually changed after she died.
It did. It became darker, slower, more agonizing. You can hear the grief in the music. And his own health started to slide pretty quickly after that. He was a chain smoker. I mean, if you watch any video of him, there's almost always a cigarette in his hand or hanging from his lip.
He developed emphysema in his mid-50s.
Right. And he just refused to slow down. The end came in 1990. His final concert was at Tanglewood, the very same place where he had studied with Koussevitzky 50 years earlier. It was a perfect full-circle moment.
Describe that final concert for us.
It was August 1990. He was conducting Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. And during the third movement, he had a massive coughing fit right there on the podium. He was clearly in pain. He was exhausted. He could barely breathe. But he didn't stop. He pushed through and finished the piece. And during the ovation, he couldn't even walk off the stage. He just leaned against the back of the podium, waving weakly to the crowd. It was a poignant final bow. He announced his retirement a few days later and died in October of that year.
There's a detail about his funeral procession that really gets to me. As the cars were driving through Manhattan toward the cemetery in Brooklyn.
The construction workers, these, rough guys in hard hats working on the skyscrapers, when the hearse went by, they all stopped working. They took off their hats, they waved and yelled, "Goodbye, Lenny."
That really sums it up, doesn't it? He wasn't Maestro Bernstein to them. He was Lenny.
Exactly. He wasn't just a conductor for the elite and the private boxes. He belonged to the city. He belonged to the people.
And he was buried at Greenwood Cemetery. What did they bury him with?
He was buried next to his wife, Felicia. And they placed a copy of Mahler's Fifth Symphony lying across his heart. The double man, united with his musical soulmate in the end.
So let's try and wrap this all up. We look at the shelf, 16 Grammys, 7 Emmys, 2 Tonys, the Kennedy Center honors. The resume is just insane. But what is the real takeaway here? What do we learn from the story of the double man?
I think we have to reconsider that whole conflict. You see, Bernstein spent his life tortured by the idea that he had to choose, that conducting was stealing time from composing, or that writing for Broadway was distracting him from writing the Great American Symphony. He thought his versatility was his weakness.
But looking back now, from our perspective, it seems like that inability to choose was actually his superpower.
Exactly. I think that's it. If he had just been a symphonic conductor, we wouldn't have the educational legacy on television. If he had just been a composer, we wouldn't have the Mahler revival. And think about his music. West Side Story is a masterpiece because he had a conductor's ear for orchestration. His conducting of Mahler was so profound because he had a composer's heart and he understood the struggle of creation.
So the fracture was actually a fusion.
Precisely. The double man wasn't a flaw, it was the engine. He brought the raw electric energy of the street to the symphony hall, and he brought the sophistication of the symphony to the Broadway stage. American music hasn't really seen anyone like him since. He didn't just perform music. He was the music.
That is a fantastic place to leave it. If you've never really listened to Bernstein conduct, do yourself a favor. Go find the recording of that 1989 Freedom concert in Berlin, or just put on the soundtrack to West Side Story. You can hear the history happening in real time. Thanks for listening to this deep dive into Leonard Bernstein. We'll catch you on the next one.